Everyone, please welcome the one and only Judy Myers.
Pipala, Pipala, Pipala. Is there anyone out there who knows how to pronounce my name? Yes! Give that woman a prize. Yes. That's right. Pipla Chasco tea. I am frequently called Cootie or Cody. But please don't short it to Pippi. I prefer Cody for obvious reasons. Cootie sounds like something unpleasant. Oh, I'm sorry. I should introduce myself to you. I have surrounded you from the moment you came into West Pasco County. I am the spirit of the lovely Pipla River. Thank you for coming to talk with me today about the history of our area. I have filled my journal with all of the events that have happened for hundreds of years, a sort of log book, if you will. And I'm so excited to share the stories contained within these pages with all of you. To begin, though, perhaps I should tell you a little bit about myself. My name comes from Seminole Creek language Pilo, meaning canoe or boat, and Chasquita, meaning chop or cut. Thus, I am the place where canoes are made, so you can see how important I was to the early inhabitants of my shores, for travel, hunting and fishing, and the exchange of goods. Nowadays, I'm used mostly for recreation, for families having fun. Oh, that's also fun for me, having them play on my shores or in my waters. Good times, as long as they don't leave any trash behind. Despite my long name, I'm slow as rivers go. I'm only 23 miles long and not terribly wide. Compared to the Mississippi, say, I am a baby. My headwaters are near Cruz Lake on the border of Fernando and Chasco counties, and I flow to the Gulf at Miller's Bayou. I may be small, but I am an important presence. Since the beginning of recorded history of this area, I've been mighty attracted to various individuals and groups. I first attracted early native peoples for my abundant food sources and travel. They enjoyed my fish, waterfowl, and lush green plants growing along my banks. Now that I've told you a little bit about myself, are you ready for your first history lesson? I'm sure you've noticed just how many Indian names are used around here. Apopka, which is from the Creek aha, potato, and kapka, eating place. Homosassa, from Seminole Creek homo, pepper, and susi, is there, or place where the wild peppers grow. Then there is Miccosukee, which is from the Ichiti, Mickey, chief, and Suki, hogs. This could be hog eaters or chief of the hog clan, depending on what source you consult. And our capital city, Tallahassee, is from the Creek Talla, town, and Hassee, old, thus Old Town. There are hundreds of Indian names used all over Florida. Why, you can't move in any direction without bumping into a thing or a place name that wasn't derived from one or more of our native or Indian tribes. One of the earliest tribes in this area, early 1500s, was the Tocobaga. Since the first Spanish colonial period, the name Tocobaga was the name of a chiefdom, its chief, and its major town. The Tocobaga inhabited the land from my shores to below Tampa Bay. Their principal site was the area known today as Safety Harbor. If you visited that city, you may have seen the huge mound that was created of discarded refuse, mostly soil and shells and bones from wildlife and seafood, the principal diet of the Tocobaga. The mound was sacred to the Tocobaga, who built an enclosed structure on the top, which may have been used for religious ceremonies or as a residence for the chief. You may have noticed a similar but smaller mound near my mouth on the Gulf. This mound was also used by the Tocobaga, who had been in this area for more than 1,000 years when the Spanish invaded in the 16th century. By the time the early inhabitants of this young country started expanding south into Florida, the Tocobaga had virtually disappeared. One or two tribes remained scattered to the north, and by the mid-18th century as far south as Cuba. What caused the disappearance of the indigenous people was the same affliction that erased many Native Americans: warfare or the introduction of diseases for which they had little or no resistance.
The Tocobaga were not the only Native tribe Americans living in the area. As the many Indian names suggest, there were various tribes living in the Gulf Coast region. By the 19th century, the Seminole had spread across Florida. The Seminoles were a mixed tribe of runaway slaves, Spaniards, and Creek Indians from Georgia. When they began pillaging Georgia farms, General Andrew Jackson drove them south to this relatively unknown and unexplored region filled with swamps, and further south to the Everglades. My shores were touched by various hostile events, including the Indian Removal Act, the Seminole Indian Wars, and the Civil War. During and after the Civil War, the land near my shores, then called Hickory Hammock, was attracting more and more businessmen and permanent settlers. One of the first settlers in the area was Peter Bailey. Today, a section of high ground along the Gulf is called Bailey's Bluff. A different spelling, but named for the same man. You may have driven down a road named for Bailey, spelled B-A-I-L-L-I-E, as you drove through Port Richey. Now, I have heard several stories from travelers on my waters about how Peter Bailey acquired the coastal lands. One particular tale comes from Bailey's days when he was assigned as a government surveyor along Florida's west coast after the Civil War. His grandson David claims that while surveying the coast, Peter came across a Tocobaga village at the north end of Tampa Bay. The village chief was stricken with grief because his only son was dying of malaria. Well, the story goes that Bailey just happened to have a supply of quinine for his own use, but gave it to the boy. This broke the fever and restored the boy to good health. As a reward, the grateful chief took Bailey to the top of a high mountain from which they could see miles in all directions. This was the smaller mound I mentioned earlier. With a swing of his arm, the chief gave the entire region to Bailey and signed a contract in his own blood. Apparently, this agreement was recorded as a legal document. Some years later, the government paid each of Bailey's heirs $100 to sign a release for the land. That's part of the story of Peter Bailey in this area. Now, it is true that Bailey and a man named Samuel Hope did bring their families back to this area and were among the first settlers. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, why isn't the city called Newport Bailey, right? Well, in the 1880s, a small community along my banks was called Hopeville. I imagine named for Samuel Hope or for some of his family. I'll get to Richie in a bit, but first, a little information about what else was going on around here. As you may know, in the 1800s, Florida was sparsely populated, but the Armed Occupation Act of 1842 brought several settlers into southern Florida. The act offered 160 acres to anyone who would build a home on the frontier of Florida. This area was considered the frontier. Now I ask you, who would not want to build a home in such a spectacular place? Once they had seen the land along the beautiful banks of the Piccolchiscotty River, with its charming vistas and teeming fish and wildlife, not to mention the nearby salt works. To many, this seemed like the perfect place to settle down and raise a family. Other inducements drew investors to the area. Just south of here, land was going for 25 cents an acre. With more and more settlers coming, this was the beginning of a land boom. And that brings me back to one of my town is called Newport Richey. Did you all enjoy your first history lesson? Yes. Are you ready for your next one? Okay. It was in 1881 that Aaron McLaughlin Richey, see, I told you I went to Richmond Bay, came from St. Joseph, Missouri to visit a friend who owned land along the Gulf Coast. Upon seeing the land along the beautiful banks of the Piccolchiscotty River, Richie decided this was the place for him. He felt the sunshine and the warm climate would be good for his alien life and an ideal spot to raise his children. Richie negotiated with a man named Felix Sowers and bought his house, 76 acres, and his orange grove on a point of land at the mouth of the river overlooking the Gulf. It was paradise. Okay, not really paradise, but close. You see, the challenge was not food or shelter which the family had, but was a lack of connection to the modern world. Richie had to travel on horseback for supplies through the woods to the nearest town, which was Tarpon Springs. Richie decided the best way to get around would be by water, so he purchased a schooner from a shipbuilder somewhat north of Cedar Key. When asked the name of the port where the ship would be registered, Richie replied, can you guess? Port Richie. That's right, he named his home Port Richie. From then on, A.M. Ritchie became known as Captain Ritchie, and Port Ritchie replaced the earlier name of Hopeville. Now, with a better, faster means of transportation, Ritchie could get supplies not only for his own family, but for all of his neighbors, so he opened a small store inside of his home. As an added convenience in 1884, he opened a small post office. Soon, the entire area around the Stunning River was known as Port Ritchie, but remained sparsely populated. At the beginning of the 20th century, that began to change. In 1904, a group of wealthy men from Georgia opened the Arapika sawmill just north of Port Ritchie. The timber industry was quite productive given the dense growth of palms, palmettos, cypress, oak, and pine. The very woodlands that had kept the population sparse was now what attracted the residents. But when the timber was gone, so were most of the families. Fortunately, this led to another enterprise. A man named Peter Weeks bought the cleared land and opened the Port Ritchie Company to develop the land. Weeks was no fool. He recognized the land as a prime spot for growth. What made the cleared land especially appealing, in addition to the beautiful Cody River, was a pristine lake. You know it as Orange Lake, just 200 yards from me. With a great deal of foresight, the Port Ritchie Company hired a manager, Mr. W.E. Guilford, who laid out a map for a future town with a grid of streets running north-south named after presidents and east-west named after states. Now Port Ritchie was a planned community, ready for business and overflowing with potential. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, where is new Port Ritchie in all of this? I'm getting there. With great plans for a wonderful little city in hand, the next question for Guilford was, where do we find the buyers, the investors, the people looking for a home in sunny Florida? To help attract buyers from the north, Guilford placed many advertisements in northern newspapers. In 1912, the Tampa Bay Hotel had a visitor by the name of Fred Sass from Missouri. When Mr. Sass left Missouri, the temperature was 5 degrees, below zero. After spending about 3 weeks searching for his idea of the promised land, Sass became acquainted with the Port Ritchie Company in their Tampa office. Mr. Guilford from that office was very happy to drive Mr. Sass to see the Port Ritchie land. Even though the road getting here was an old dirt road, and the town had only a few buildings in it, Sass was particularly impressed by one, a half-finished hotel near Orange Lake. After a peaceful boat ride down, what river? Yes, the beautiful Cody River. Sass was enchanted by the possibilities. He bought the hotel and made it a fixture of the growing community. Of course, it didn't hurt that Mrs. Sass, who was the first woman to live in the newly developed town, was also an excellent cook and hostess. Soon she was hosting monthly dinners at 35 cents a plate. Especially popular was her fish fry. Said fish from my abundant waters, naturally. In addition to being entrepreneurs, Mr. and Mrs. Sass were very community-minded. She organized the Port Ritchie Settlers Benefit Club to help improve community involvement, and her husband Fred entertained guests at the inn by feeding a 9-foot alligator named Jack who lived in Orange Lake. Oh, the visitors were delighted when Jack lunged up and snapped the meat from the stick in Fred's hand. When Jack grew a little too big for everyone's comfort, this entertainment ceased. Be mindful, wherever there's a pond of water in Florida, you will find alligators. Alligators or not, the town was growing, and more residents were taking an interest in its success. One such person was Gerben DeVries, who came to Florida on doctor's orders to recuperate from a long bout of malaria. He and his wife built a 2-room house on Central Avenue, just 2 blocks from the lake. They were quite content with life in our happy little town. As DeVries regained his health, he took an avid interest in improving the town. One such improvement which got DeVries' interest was the postal service. Since there were no direct roads between the growing towns, it was very difficult to get the mail from Port Ritchie. The land between the towns was densely wooded with trees and undergrowth, so the best way to get the mail was by a rowboat down the Cody River. Okay, I'm looking at your faces and I can tell that I've confused you. You're thinking, Aren't we in Port Richey? Let's just take time for a brief geography review. You are right and wrong. Since Captain Ritchie named his home Port Richey on the north side of the river and up along the coast, for convenience, this entire area was known as Port Richey. The area south of the river, moving inland and along the river, is where we are now, separated from the business area of coastal Port Richey by land still thickly overgrown with brush and trees. Now, do you understand why it was so difficult to get the mail? Okay, let's get back to Mr. DeVries. One of DeVries' jobs was to get the mail for the Port Richey Land Office and others in the town. This was not an entirely unpleasant job since he fished as he rode along. He was expected to bring back 2 fish for every letter. As the population grew, this practice was discontinued. Logically, the solution was to get a post office of their own so that mail could be delivered directly to the townspeople. To accomplish this, Mr. DeVries circulated 2 petitions. One was for the post office, and the other was to make him postmaster. Both were signed by all 80 residents in the surrounding area. Now, the land company had worked hard to establish the name Port Richey in its northern advertising. So to avoid confusion, they decided to name the post office Newport, one word, Richey. Subsequently, they found out there was already a town called Newport, Florida. Like, what are the odds? Who would have thought? Therefore, they decided to change the name to, you guessed it, Newport, 2 words, Richey. When rail service was extended from Elmhurst to Newport Richey, the town got another boost. The Tampa and Gulf Coast Railroad Company came to Elmhurst, supported by the Elmhurst Citrus Growers Association, to provide transportation for its goods and workers. As Newport Richey continued to grow, the hug and grunt, as the railroad was fondly called by the locals, extended another 6 miles into the downtown and made Newport Richey the last stop before heading north. The train made 2 stops daily, and the whole town turned out to be for passengers. Now that Newport Richey was connected to the Main Street population of Tampa, the town's movers and shakers felt this little town was headed for something special. Good things continued happening in Newport Richey. A new hotel, the Grand Rapids Inn, was built, immediately added to, and then reorganized as the Hotel Newport. Our first newspaper, the Newport Richey Post, printed its first edition in January 1916. Following shortly were, and I made a big old breath for this one, the Newport Richey Drugstore and Soda Fountain, W.H. Valentine's Driving Store, J.W. Clark's Meat Market, W.A. Casey's Barbershop, Dr. Posey's office, and many more exciting additions. We built a 2-story school on Main Street, reinforcing the other 4 schools in the area. Now, I say we because I feel I am and have always been an inseparable part of Newport Richey. Anything that ever happens in this town, I am an integral part of. And I love where I am. But you know what? That's enough about me. Let's get back to the marvelous improvements being made to our beloved little city. City leaders acquired the first fire truck in 1917. And even though our thoroughfares were still mostly muddy lanes, automobiles were appearing on the streets as northern visitors could now afford Henry Ford's Model T for their trips to southern Florida. Oh, I relish the feeling that it had something to do with attracting future residents and visitors to Newport Richey. Okay, all right, before we move on to our next lesson, quick temperature check of the room. Everyone still doing okay? Yes. Okay, I don't see too many of you nodding off just yet. Maybe just that one gentleman in the back, but it's okay, sir. We only have 2 more lessons and then we're done. All right, I promise. All right. Okay, let's move on. Now, I mentioned automobiles, but at first, our most common means of transportation were horses and oxen. However, with the appearance of more and more automobiles, paved roads became the town's next challenge. Since each state would be responsible for its portion of the highway, the Florida State Highway System was formed to construct their part of the Dixie Highway. Did you know that the Dixie Highway had 2 routes from the north? One was from Detroit to Miami, the other was from Chicago to Kansas. Perhaps some of you traveled along one of those routes to get here today. Responsibility for paving the highway fell to the local community. I proudly take part in this enormous benefit to the town. Crushed rock, dredged from me, the Footy River, was used to pave Grand Boulevard. Thus, Grand Boulevard from Newport Richey to Elvis became part of the Dixie Highway system, leading travelers right through the heart of our inland city. Soon, the arrival of another astute businessman would lead the next leap forward for Newport Richie. Does anybody want to guess who that might be? George Sims! That's right, yes! George Sims and his wife Marjorie arrived from Detroit looking for a winter home. In 1916, Sims purchased the Port Richey Company and 14,000 acres along the Cody River. While George worked, Marjorie motored up and down the river. She loved the land along the river and decided that's where she wanted to build her home. Not in town where George wanted to build it. Well, you know who won that argument. In addition to selling home sites, Mr. Sims had his eye on another enterprise which he thought would fit right into the climate and location of Newport Richey. Oh, I get so excited when I think of all the wonderful things that were coming to Newport Richey. I hope I can relate to you the uniqueness of our small town among other small Florida towns that did not share our good fortune. Let me share Mr. Sims' idea with you. The fledgling motion picture industry was looking to move from cold northern locations to warmer climates. Hollywood was becoming the primary location for making motion pictures, but most of the people involved were in eastern cities like New York and Chicago. Travel was still an issue in the 1920s. George Sims thought that Newport Richey had as good a shot as anywhere to become the Hollywood of the East. To accomplish this, two items proved to be impediments. One was Florida's hot humidity. Oh my word. It was so uncomfortable to work in and made the actors makeup run. The second barrier to the movie industry was the lack of monetary incentives for production companies with big expenses to move here. Yes, we were experiencing a land boom, but we did not yet have the economic infrastructure to support such an expensive industry as making movies. Despite these drawbacks, we still did gain attention from several production companies. In the meantime, the infrastructure and community services improved. We have come to my favorite part in our entire history. The social and cultural underpinnings of Newport Richey began to grow with the arrival of Dr. L. Roy Avery. He was a highly educated and active public servant. He had been a teacher, a superintendent, a writer, and an Ohio senator. Dr. Avery was also an avid reader and brought his collection of over 1,000 books with him to Newport Richey. With these, he started the town's first public library and historical society. Avery was such a benefactor to the town that he became known as the grand old man of Newport Richey. Soon thereafter came a flurry of events to town. In 1919, Warren Burns from New York City and his brother Clyde from Chicago built an electric company. The Gulf Utility Company used coal-fired steam engines and soon strung electric lights throughout the city, which became ablaze with Edison's incandescent light bulbs. At the same time, Warren Burns also built an ice factory. That same year, the telephone came to town. This newfangled invention connected homes and businesses throughout the city. With all this technology at hand, Newport Richey was truly unique among other Florida small towns. The intersection of Main Street and Grand Boulevard saw the building of the town's first brick structures. One housed the Port Richey Company, one was the First State Bank, and the third was a two-story mercantile building with 4 apartments on the second floor. All 3 buildings are still standing today, so when you're strolling down Main Street, be sure to look for them. Another important building constructed during this time was the Palms Theater, which showed silent movies every Saturday night. With all these improvements, the city was on track for greater things as the Category 3 hurricane in 1921 did not derail. All in all, Newport Richey survived the storm, with damage to only some barns, woodsheds, and rooftops. After cleaning up the debris from the streets and the adjoining areas, the town's founding fathers, Urban DeVries, George Sims, and Elroy Avery, were determined to make Newport Richey the gateway to tropical Florida. In 1922, the Board of Trade asked Mr. DeVries to develop a marketing plan that would attract people to the newly constructed city. He had to look no farther than Tampa for an idea that seemed to work. Tampa had created a celebration around a fictional pirate, Jose Gaspar, who attacked the city, and voila, the Gasparilla Festival was born. This celebration brought thousands of visitors to Tampa yearly. DeVries decided that New Porridge needed such a rousing tale filled with pageantry to develop a festival around. So he came up with a story involving Indians and Spaniards who fought a battle along my banks. No matter that the Indian tribe he chose, Calusa or Calusia, and lived far to the south of here. Thus was created, you know it, the Chasco Fiesta! The fictional tale involving a surprise attack on the Spaniards, leaving only 3 survivors, was published in the local newspaper. Of the 3 survivors, 2 were teenagers, Don Felipe and Dona Isabel, who took new Indian names, Hitler and Chasco. Of course, these 2 went on to be King Hitler and Queen Chasco, who ruled over the 3-day fiesta. Yay! The first Chasco Fiesta opened on March 2nd, 1922 with a parade down the boulevard. A carnival atmosphere was created in Enchantment Park with pony rides, games, food stands, and horse and car races around Orange Lake. Many members of the public dressed in colorful costumes added to the revelry. The fiesta attracted thousands to Newport Richie and raised more than $1,000 for the Avery Library. The cabaret and vaudeville acts at the Palms played to packed houses and brought in about $400. To all concerned, the Chasco Fiesta was a huge success and remains so today. In fact, it is one of the oldest city-sponsored festivals in the entire state. And I must confess, because I am among friends, so I can do this, I love seeing all the people having such fun along my banks and in boat rides on my waters. Those enjoying the original festivities were a mix of residents and visitors, which led to many visitors becoming future residents. The continuing growth of the community made it obvious that just a few civic-minded men and women could not sustain such growth through donations and fundraisers. What was needed was a formal government structure to help guide the future development of the town. With this in mind, the residents voted to incorporate in 1924. Dr. Elroy Avery was elected our first mayor, along with a town clerk, a marshal, and 7 councilmen. The first order of business for the new city council was to adopt an ordinance to accept from George Sims the whole of Enchantment Park, including all its accoutrements and the wooden bridge across the Cody River. The park's name was changed from Enchantment Park to Sims Park in honor of Mr. Sims, a fitting tribute considering he had given them such a generous gift. So many things were going well for the growing city of Newport Richie, but it didn't take long for residents to notice a few problems that came along with the growth. With no ordinances against it, livestock and leaders were free to roam the streets. This was not appealing to future land buyers and residents. This problem was solved by putting a fence around Orange Lake. But a bigger, more serious problem came in the form of crooked real estate agents who sold land to buyers sight unseen. Frequently, the land turned out not to be described, and Florida was getting a bad reputation. Thankfully, Newport Richie had a good reputation when it came to land deals, which the city leaders were careful to maintain, so the housing deals just kept on coming. All this growth was good and bad. The city's infrastructure couldn't keep up. But again, the efficient leaders of Newport Richie got ahead of this problem by allocating money for better roads, sidewalks with streetlights, and bridges. Many of the downtown roads were paved, and 2 years after that paving project, Main Street was extended across the Cody River by way of a new concrete bridge, which replaced the old wooden bridge. By 1925, we had a municipal waterworks, complete with sewer system. Unlike many cities in Florida, Newport Richie felt ready to take the next step in its growth. All these improved living conditions made Newport Richie very attractive to wealthy Northerners. Okay, before we move on one final time, we're still doing okay? Yes. Okay. Have we learned anything fun and exciting that we're going to put in our Christmas letters this year? Okay. All right. Perhaps the most important question of the evening. Are you ready for your final history lesson? Yes. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Now, at first, I said all these improved living conditions made Newport Richie very attractive to these Northerners. Well, many of the elite Northerners who headed south were business owners, manufacturers, and industrialists looking for new opportunities. Soon, Newport Richie had a bicycle maker, an auto manufacturer, and new real estate companies that concentrated on creating exclusive developments for more affluent buyers. Catering to the wealthier residents meant upgrading the town's amenities, such as amusement venues. The Small Palms Theater was hugely popular, but the dirt floor and bench seating? That was far from appealing to the wealthy. This led to the formation of a corporation comprised of 6 local investors called the Ritchie Amusement Company, whose sole purpose was to build a new, elaborate theater that would be the pride of the city. The theater was built, and I can't tell you how excited the next few years were in Newport Richie. Just thinking about it makes me bubble over. Oh. Pardon my exuberance? Let me tell you some of the exciting things that happened. The new Spanish-style theater was built on the boulevard, just 1 block off Main Street. It was equipped to show movies as well as to hold live stage performances. George Sims, who had already done so much to ensure the growth of Newport Richie, joined together with other businessmen to recruit theater-minded newcomers to relocate to Newport Richie. Sims had been spending his summers in Great Neck on Long Island, a place most popular with the Manhattan theatrical crowd. So the committee of Newport Richie businessmen went to work and sold the virtues of their Florida home to people connected to the Broadway theater whose performers were becoming movie stars. George Sims saw no reason why Newport Richie could not be the southern home for this northern movie colony. Soon, the Newport Richie press was announcing that Broadway millionaires were buying home sites in our beloved little city, many along the banks of the Code River. Movie stars, producers, and musicians were among the first wave of celebrities to come to town. One of the most famous was Thomas Meehan, the handsome Hollywood man, and his brother James, who was a real estate agent. Both felt they were getting in on the ground floor of something special, and they were. Thomas's fame brought other celebrities to Newport Richie, and most bought their home sites from his brother James. When handsome Thomas walked down the street, all the ladies away. But Thomas was not just a snowbird, is what we call our wintertime visitors now. He built a mansion along my banks, registered to vote, and made Newport Richie his home in what he called the most beautiful and home-like city in all of Florida. Meehan became such a valued part of the city that the new theater was named the Thomas Meehan Theater. It was rumored that Gloria Swanson, Charlotte Greenwood, George Holland, and other stars visited the town. From the music industry came Earl Bannon, Irving Bergman, orchestra leader Paul Whiteman, and the #1 movie producer Sam Harris. Oh, there were just too many show business people to name now. It seemed as if George Sims' dream of making Newport Richie the Hollywood of the East was well on its way to becoming a reality. Sports figures were also attracted to Newport Richie. When it was noted that another activity to be enjoyed by the Richie fans was needed, the Jasmine Point Golf Club was built. Again, Thomas Meehan was called upon to help lure his friend, golfer Gene Saracen, to help design and be the club's pro. Saracen built a home near Meehan and intended to make Newport Richie his home. And he did, for 4 years. But a disaster was looming on the horizon which would affect the entire country. More about that in a moment, but in the meantime, in the mid-1920s, great things kept happening to Newport Richie. Now remember, all these people were staying in our hotels, eating in our restaurants, and shopping in our stores. As a result, more shops and businesses were built along Main Street and Grand Boulevard. Groundbreaking for a luxury hotel called the Newport Richie Community Hotel occurred on August 11, 1926. In keeping with the prominent architectural style of the area, the hotel was Spanish influenced in design. It consisted of 50 guest rooms with private baths, telephones, steam heat, and wall-to-wall carpeting. There were 3 lounge areas in addition to the main salon, a dining room with a mahogany bar, and 3 small bedrooms to accommodate staff that were not local. Outside the Spanish structure was a courtyard with fountain opening onto Main Street, plus a large terrace that overlooked Sims Park. Okay, contrary to popular rumors, the underground tunnel to the river was not used for smuggling booze. It was used to carry waste to the river. I was not overly pleased with this pollution of our beautiful waters, but all of the houses along the river did the same thing. Don't worry, the city sewer system is much more advanced today. In November 1926, the structure was christened the Hacienda Hotel. and the keynote speaker was George Sims' good friend and famous comedian, Ed Wynn. On February 5th, 1927, the hotel's doors were opened for the townspeople, followed by a formal opening on February 17th, complete with banquet and professional orchestra. The hacienda was a success. Many of the rich and famous kept the hotel at their capacity during the winter months. New Perici was now seen as not a small, off-the-beaten-path kind of town, but as a beautiful resort destination. Good times continued in New Perici, even though the land boom for the rest of Florida was over by 1928. Wealthy investors kept coming into the city, and the winter season of 1929 was expected to be the biggest ever. All the hotels were booked to capacity, the Poems Theater was renovated, and the Meehan Theater added sound to accommodate talkies. All of our stores were stocked, and Sims Park added several outdoor recreation venues, including a new dock which gained access to my beautiful waters. Something else happened to me during this time that was not pleasant. I was dredged to create a deeper channel to the Gulf in anticipation of the larger yachts that would be arriving for the winter season. For the golfers, improvements were planned for the Jasmine Point Golf Course, including 9 more holes, a casino, a clubhouse, and a pavilion. As you can see, things were still booming in New Perici. Well, you know what happened on October 29, 1929. But the stock market crash did not make the headlines of our newspapers. Instead, it was filled with all the activities for the upcoming winter season. Celebrities continued to flood into the city, many as guests of the meetings, and there was a rumor going around that MGM was looking at New Perici as a filming location. But as 1929 wore on, 3 events signaled all was not well, and folks began to worry. One was Bayshore Estates stumbled, when many buyers pulled out of their contracts, and folks feared that Jasmine Estates would also falter. 2, when beautification projects were undertaken, it was seen as desperation, and not the best use of the city's money. And 3, when Gene Saracen won a prize for depositing his funds in his New York bank instead of the local bank, depression was beginning to be felt in the city. Although New Perici managed to stay afloat during the Depression, changes had to be made. Salaries of many city officials were cut, streetlights were turned off in some areas, and the library closed for a while. The hardest blow came when the First State Bank of New Perici closed its doors in the spring of 1931. 2 more blows came with the closing of the Meehan Theater and the failure of the Jasmine Point Golf Club. In 1934, Gene Saracen cut ties to the golf club and sold his home on the river, but stayed in the town that he loved for 2 more years, until 1936. That same year, Thomas Meehan passed away from cancer. In one very sad year, we lost 2 of our most famous and influential ambassadors. The mid-1930s were very troubling times for me and for our economy. We lost several of our most important and beloved citizens, including the grand old man himself, Dr. Elroy, who passed away at the age of 91. Since New Perici was built on people and not on business or industry, it felt as if our lifeblood was draining away. We would never fulfill the promise of our illustrious past. But, you know what? Don't count us down and out yet. You never know when a new burst of energy will come along. Just east of the city lies a beautiful lake formed by my drainage basin. An area businessman, Ed Haley, made plans to turn Moon Lake and the surrounding acreage into a fully stocked hunting and fishing refuge. The project was started in 1933 and was fully operational by 1936. Haley knew he had to attract more than just hunters and fishermen, so to encourage longer stays for entire families and affluent tourists, the Moon Lake Garden Center, the ranch, was created. When finished, this magnificent ranch would include a grand lodge, cozy cabins, riding stables, fishing piers, boardwalks, a casino, various dining venues, exotic gardens, and a dance hall. And who do you think would help build this magnificent dream? At a time when we needed it most, New Perici supplied almost 200 construction workers and hundreds of men, women, and teenagers who worked in the service areas. When opened opened, the large ranch attracted the celebrities who had visited the hacienda and was wildly successful. But trouble for the whole United States was looming on the horizon. With America's entry into World War II came the rationing of cars, tires, gas, and food. All the items needed to sustain Florida's tourist industry. In 1941, the Moon Lake Gardens and Blue Ranch closed. The combined effect of the Depression and World War II was an economic slowdown nationwide, and Newport Richey was no exception. We returned to being a small, out-of-the-way Florida town. The decades of the 50s, 60s, and 70s saw several changes to the city. First, with very few people making any money, our cost of living became one of the lowest in the nation. We became a retirement community. In fact, by no less a respected publication than Consumer Reports, we were called the most affordable place to retire in the entire country. Second, the expansion of Route US 19 caused the business district to change its focus to smaller shops and restaurants. The third event causing a change for our community, believe it or not, was the advent of central air conditioning. By the 1970s, many retirees found Newport Richey to be a very comfortable and peaceful place to retire. Among the influx of retirees was the well-known country music Carter family. Pop and Mother Maybelle bought a small cottage near my mouth. Oh, I mean, the mouth of the Cody River. When Mrs. Carter passed away, she left her bungalow to her daughter June, who was married to Johnny Cash. You see, we were still attracting celebrities. For more than 30 years, the Cashes visited their home on the Cody, but just before his death in 2003, they sold their little house on the river. After 60 years, our beautiful hacienda stopped operating as a hotel, and for a while was a treatment facility. The city purchased the hotel in 2003 with plans to return it to its former grandeur. A grant was obtained with the aid of then Senator Walter Simpson, and some major repairs were made to the foundation, flooring, and roof. It was offered for bid and was purchased by Mr. Jim Gunderson, owner of the Lakeside Inn in Mount Dora. Despite the virus pandemic that stopped work on many activities, work continued slowly on the hacienda until its official reopened on September 14, 2022. The 21st century brought a mini renaissance to our community. With our low cost of living, that led to an increase in population by bringing in many families instead of only retirees. Other factors in our rebuilding included improvement in education, medical care, recreational activities, and improvements in public safety. In the last few years, many of the downtown buildings have been given new life as new businesses have taken hold, including gift shops, bakeries, microbreweries, a world-renowned tea room, and restaurants. The housing projects like Stonehaven at Main Street and the Central overlooking the beautiful Picrochester River will maintain the historical identity of the downtown area in their architecture. Remember, we still had many buildings in the same style as the hacienda. One such edifice is the Thomas Meehan Theater, which is now the Richie Suncoast Theater. Thanks to the efforts of various dedicated citizens, the theater now reflects the beauty of its inception in the 1920s. Well, my friends, it seems we have come to the end of our last history lesson. Now that you know some of our history, don't forget to take a ride along my banks to see the magnificent mansions remaining, a beautiful reminder of the rich tapestry of Newport Richey's glorious past. And if you happen to go by Johnny and June Cash's bungalow near Rose Bayou, just look a couple of doors down and you will see the mound left by the Tocobamba Indians 1,000 years earlier. Now that we have come full circle since our talk began, do you now remember how to pronounce my name? Chasco, yes! I hope to see you all again and you enjoy the river and all of my fun times.
Big round of applause for Judy Myers, the River Spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us this evening as Judith Kustos and Cindy Gray present Judy. Oh, another round of applause, why not? I want to recognize a few additional folks. I want to recognize the playwright, Dr. Alma Bennett. Big round of applause for her. There she is. Director Jess Glass of the historic Richie Suncoast Theater. The River Steering Committee who helped put this together, Abby Meisner, Judith Kustos, Lori Baker, and Cindy Gray. Mario Caruso, President of the Historical Society, joined by his wife Karen, our curator. Ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you're all passionate about history, so I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you if you haven't been to the Historical Museum. So I'll just tell you to come visit us if you haven't. We are open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 1 to 4 p.m. And we're going to be open for extended hours during Chasco Fiesta, so come on down, take a look at the history. These artifacts right here are usually at the museum, but they went on a field trip today. It's nice weather, so we let them out sometimes. So come on, huh? Oh yes, the picture of these on the back end of the program if you haven't seen that already. So come on down and visit us and have a great rest of the Chasco Fiesta, everybody.